Let's get some more information on the recently agreed to contract extension between Jim Harbaugh and the University of Michigan. To help us do that, we say hello to Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports. Bruce, we know the length of the extension, 4 years, designed to keep Harbaugh in Ann Arbor through 2025. What other details about the contract can you share?
Rick, the base salary will drop a little bit, but the incentives are pretty strong in Jim Harbaugh's favor if it goes well. I think what this really, the dynamic that's played out here has been, look, everybody knows Jim Harbaugh has been unable to this point to beat the arch rival, Ohio State. He's also struggled against Michigan State, which is obviously an important rivalry if you're a Wolverine. So at this point, I think a lot of people looked and said, okay, well, what is Michigan's next best alternative? And I don't think there was one that was readily apparent to them, right? Who did they feel that much more confident was going to be a slam dunk to get the program beyond where it is now? I mean, keep in mind, before the pandemic, he's had 5 years and he had 4 top 20 finishes. It's just he has been unable to get close to beating Ohio State. From Jim Harbaugh's perspective, and this is something we reported about a few weeks ago, he really, I don't think his name is as hot as it used to be in NFL circles. A lot has changed in the last few years, and certainly when he left the Niners, but I think even in the last couple of years with some of the struggles that he's had at Michigan, getting them from being a pretty good team to close to a great one. And with some of the openings that were out there, there just wasn't a lot of interest there. And I think both sides looked at it and said, okay, let's keep going forward and hopefully we can make some adjustments and still build off of what we have and hopefully sooner than later get over the top and finally topple Ohio State.
Now, before this extension was agreed to, Harbaugh had one of the shortest lengths remaining on his contract of any Power 5 football coach. That's no good for recruiting. So this should certainly help in that regard. But when it comes to buyouts, my understanding, Bruce, and I'm not sure if you know any more specifics here, that the buyout is going to be significantly lower than it was in his original contract, which would obviously make it a safer play for the university if that win-loss record and that record against top 10 opponents in Ohio State specifically doesn't improve and improve somewhat quickly.
Yeah, my understanding is that too, Rick, where they have a little more flexibility financially. And obviously we're coming out of we're in the midst of a pandemic. So I think there's some financial issues all over the place. I do think one thing that worked out okay for Michigan is with all of the speculation about Jim Harbaugh's future over the last really 2 months, they actually did a pretty good job closing on the recruiting class and had a top 15 class with a bunch of big-time players, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that bought into coming to Michigan. So I think on that side of it, there are some positive developments. Now he's got to get sorted out in the next couple of days. There are some contracts on his staff that are set to expire, I believe, on January 10th. So what do they do? We know that obviously Don Brown was dismissed. We reported on that a couple of weeks ago, the defensive coordinator. And Don Brown's now at University of Arizona. What other moves are going to be made and adjustments that Michigan football is going to set forth as they try to honestly get back some momentum? Because it just feels like in the last 3 years or so, they've really backslid.
And obviously that date of January 10th with those expiring contracts, probably the reason why this extension starts officially on January the 11th. Bruce, let's finish with this. How quickly do you think this has to turn for Jim Harbaugh? And when you talk about turning, it's obviously a different level than it is for most programs. They've been to 5 bowl games. It's not as if they've struggled against competition they should beat. It's against the competition that they are underdogs against. Is this a matter of Harbaugh looking at 2021 as if this is a season in which they have to compete for the Big Ten championship, or else we could be in the same conversation perhaps 11 months from now?
Yeah, it's hard to predict what it's going to look like, back in next November, late November, to see what happens. Unfortunately, fair or unfair, he is really judged by that game more than any other, right? And so if he goes 10-2, but one of the 10 is beating Ohio State, I think a lot of people would see that as a huge amount of progress. Whereas if he goes 11-1 and lose by 3 touchdowns and isn't competitive with Ohio State, I think it's going to be like he's never going to get past them, right? Especially if you look at the dynamic of Ohio State, we think is going to lose Justin Fields and a bunch of other really good players after after Monday night. So, hey, maybe you should be closer to them. And clearly there's a gap between Ohio State and everybody else. But right now, we're coming out of a year where there were some really dismal performances. They didn't even play Ohio State. And so, I think it's hard to predict where we're going to be, 10 months from now or 11 months from now with Michigan football and what the vibe is on Jim Harbaugh. I don't feel like people there have kind of been resigned to, well, we can be a top 25 program, but because we're not able to recruit maybe the same kinds of kids as Alabama and Clemson and now Ohio State, that this is our lot in life. I just don't think the president of the university may have a different view of it. I don't think Jim Harbaugh does. I don't think his AD does. I don't think a lot of people who play for that program do. It's just they have to find a way to get more competitive with Ohio State. And the margin for error keeps getting thinner and thinner.
I agree with you. I think Ward Manuel said the very same thing today, said 2020 simply wasn't acceptable, wasn't up to the standards they expect at Michigan, but believes that Harbaugh is still the guy to get them back on the right trajectory. Great stuff as always from Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports. Bruce, we appreciate you sharing your insight and your time as always.
Thanks, Rick. Take care.